In 1985, the National Gallery of Victoria purchased Weeping Woman for $1.6 million. Was it worth it? I'm on my way to see Victoria's most valuable painting, at least in terms of dollars. Later I'm going to take you through 8 ways to determine the value of an artwork. But first, Weeping Woman. $1.6 million in 1985 was a tidy sum, as it is now. Today that would be 4.8 million Australian dollars, about US 3 million. You can buy a lot of stuff for almost $5 million. The painting was said to be the most expensive purchase by any Australian gallery. At 1.6 million, she eclipses in absolute terms the purchase of Blue Poles by Jackson Pollock in the 1970s, although probably not in relative terms. There's a link to my video about Blue Poles in the description. She's still here in the National Gallery of Victoria, or the NGV as we call it. And up the escalator, through this door, and here she sits, looking out on Melbourne as she is destined to do, according to NGV Director Patrick McCoffey, who said, "This face is going to haunt Melbourne for the next 100 years." Was she worth it? Should this kind of money be spent on art? There are lots of ways to answer that question, but as we started with dollars, let's answer it that way first. At its current valuation by Sotheby's at $100 million, we can say from an investment perspective, yes, she was certainly worth it. But that just kicks the question down the road. If it would sell for $100 million now, is it worth that? In fact, how do you value art? I mean you, how do you value art? There are several ways you might use, and we'll go through a list in a moment. But first let's look at this painting, because its artist, concept and history help us understand what I'm going to say later. Picasso painted several versions of this woman weeping. The style is Cubism, which he and Georges Braque created, an angular and multi-dimensional style that you might think takes out some of the humanity of the woman, and which makes this image more raw, more abrasive, more jagged and cutting than a mere representational portrait would have achieved. The series of Weeping Woman paintings arose from one of his most famous paintings, Geurnica, which I have already reviewed. I'll put a link at the end. In fact, Picasso had placed a weeping woman in Geurnica, but removed it because he thought it detracted attention from the screaming women, deciding that screaming was in the moment and that weeping came later. The colours are caustic. The green here has been described as acid green. The pink has had anything pretty driven out, leaving us with another uncomfortable colour. In fact, there's nothing comfortable about the painting at all. Neither was that intended. It's raw, unfiltered misery. In the Cubist style, we see both the side and front of her face at the same time. Her hand holds a handkerchief, you may not have recognised that until now, into which she is crying uncontrollably, her tears running down her cheeks. She arose, in her various versions, out of Geurnica. Geurnica was Picasso's response to the new horror of bombing a city to rubble from the air, Franco's further contribution to the misery he was already inflicting on Spain by allowing Hitler to test out his bombers on the Basque city. With a link to clear and fresh historical context by a renowned artist in a new and confronting style, it certainly caused attention. And the Weeping Woman is a postscript, an underlining of the continuing misery of the Nazi bombing. Let me state the obvious. She barely looks like a woman. Creative artistic skill seems to be missing. She's no Mona Lisa, no Sargent portrait. The colours are wrong, the shapes are wrong, even the view, the perspective is wrong. In fact, the whole style seems childish. Picasso was well able to render reality in a representational way, but he grew to dismiss this as not the most effective way to communicate. He said, "It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child." Some people find this annoying. They are able to accept that there are artists who paint like this, and in even more abstract ways, but become very annoyed that a lot of money is exchanged for something my 6-year-old could paint. Australia had seen this thinking before with blue poles, but I think had grown a little since then. Blue poles stirred up a massive negative reaction in the popular press, but from what I can find, the response to Weeping Woman appears to have been a little more sophisticated. That she has ended up in Melbourne, Australia, is a testament to the National Gallery of Victoria and its intention to collect truly international and important works of art. The painting was stolen soon after it was acquired by a group representing contemporary artists. It was returned some time later, having been put in a locker in Melbourne's Spencer Street railway station. It's a great story, not told here, but worth looking up, especially Mark Fennell's series Framed, available in Australia on SBS On Demand or elsewhere on Apple TV+. So here we have it, the most expensive painting ever bought in Victoria, and now its most valuable. With that context, let's ask, how do we value art? Here's 8 ways. Money. I know it's crass, but at least it's real. Somebody has assigned value. Why did they do that? Based on some of the following things in my list. A quick note that as an artist you will contribute greatly to your sale prices when you eventually shuffle off this mortal coil. Supply and demand, there's no more coming. Your set of works is complete. No rush though, just keep creating, that's way better. Fame. Being famous as an artist creates its own vortex of fame. The Mona Lisa is famous now because it's famous. Few seem to look closely. Their only glance is to position themselves for the selfie. Weeping Woman was acquired because she is representative of an art style by a renowned artist and one with a fascinating backstory. Its theft and recovery have, of course, added to its fame. Does that make it better to look at? Does it teach us any more? At least some of its visitors at the NGV are there to see the painting which was the subject of an art heist. Provenance. It's part of fame but worth considering separately. Who has owned the painting before? If a painting has been owned by an art collector, say Peggy Guggenheim or the Rockefellers, there's a recognition that people who knew what they were doing have assigned value, so it must be there. Maybe it's an elaborate Ponzi scheme, but centuries of art collection says otherwise. Investment. The fact that art can be an investment, as we have seen with the Weeping Woman and Blue Poles, teaches us that sufficient people will always see value in great art. Of course, to realise an investment, you have to sell. A budget-conscious Australian government toyed with the idea of selling blue poles a while back and was, I think, quite surprised at the backlash. Turns out we grew up a bit from the laughter at it in the 1970s. Well, enough of us at least. Context. Does the artwork shine a light on culture or events, or evoke a time and place well? Does it speak to you? Does it speak to broader issues? Does it hold a necessary mirror up to things others are unable to process or even acknowledge? Weeping Woman's link to the bombing of Geurnica and that painting adds to its message and to the times in which it was created. We know the story and are glad that an artist responded in a way that spoke for our own feelings, in ways we could not articulate so well ourselves. Skill. Sometimes I think Picasso is actively working to disavow us of this. Of course we like things skillfully done. For most of art history, this would have been the guiding principle. But if you think skill is enough, go to a gallery of portraits of the 16th and 17th centuries, all skillfully done, and realise that after a while they become sort of boring. Because we don't know the people, barely understand the historical context and usually don't recognise the artists' names. Skill is more than execution. The concept of an artwork takes thought and understanding and is seeking connection with us. And without a concept, we end up with merely a pretty picture. Chocolate box lids, as one of my artist friends dismissively describes them. Is the concept real and really saying something? Or is it just a piece of junk, given stature because somebody put it on a plinth with a little plaque? Is skill only to be seen in execution? Or in concept too? Or both? You have to decide this for yourself. Effect on a society. Maybe it's controversial, but it's clear to me that paintings have changed history. My review of Sargent's World War I painting, Gassed, talks about changes in international law. My very first video on Goya's 3rd of May 1808 asks this question: can art change your mind? If you watch it, please don't judge, it was my very first video. Even blue poles here in Australia has changed us, made us less parochial, opened us up to more ways of seeing the world. Effect on us personally. Now we're talking. What does an artwork do to us? This is what makes us purchase an artwork, and not just for galleries. If you can afford it, get yourself an original painting from a contemporary artist. You will enjoy it for a lifetime. So was the NGV's purchase of Weeping Woman worth it? Well, you have to decide, but for me it's obvious. Of course it was. Special marks to you if you've noticed that the logo of my channel contains the jumbled up features of the Weeping Woman and the colours as well. My channel kicked over 1,000 subscribers a couple of weeks back, and now it's rocketed up to 1,200 or more. So that's a bit exciting for me. I'm glad some of you are seeing some value in what I do. If you want to watch that video I made about Geurnica, it's available here. See you next time.